Hello and welcome to this channel. And today I am talking with Warren, who just got an offer from Warwick University.
It was very surprising.
Indeed. I found it very surprising as well, because I also got an offer from York as well. So, I mean, I think this is a very good place to start off with, because we definitely do have a very interesting situation where I'm not sure, either fortunately or unfortunately, got very, very early offers from two of our universities.
Like, it's surprising because it was the day before Warwick just dropped an email. It's like, I received your application. And this morning when I woke up, it's like, I accepted you. I offered you a place. I'm like, am I this good? I know I'm good, but
Indeed, that was exactly my reaction. And hello to Harry Stark in the comments, who has fortunately joined our live stream today. I hope you're doing well. But essentially, it was quite funny because I sent in my applications before Warren did. Normally, we do things really quickly, but this time I beat him by like an entire week. So I sent mine in, and then it was almost the same night that I sent it in the morning that I actually got the offer. And I was actually watching football, and I was watching Chelsea at 3 a.m. in the morning because of the time difference. And I'm watching Chelsea, and I suddenly see a email. I'm like, what's this? It's like, York has sent you an offer. And I'm like, what is this offer? Do you think we are allowed to share our offers on YouTube? I think it is. It's not crazy, right? I'm sure our old head girl has shared her offers. So I mean,
yes, I got 150,000 views.
Indeed, that was quite surprising. Hopefully, this does as well as that one. But essentially, the funniest thing is
because we didn't get into Columbia, UPenn.
Indeed, that is indeed true. I mean, we haven't even applied to it yet. That's the truth. But essentially, I think, the funniest thing is that, like, the offer you get, that if you don't meet the offer, you know that you're going to mess up every single other university. So it kind of has that idea of angst with the offer as well. Do you not feel that as well? Yeah. It's kind of like, if I mess this up, it's impossible.
Well, it seems to me that when I got the Warwick offer, it didn't relieve my stress, but instead exacerbated it, in the sense that Warwick is my safety. So once I got the offer, it's like, if I fuck up everything else, then I really have to go to this shitty university. And it really made me contemplate life and what I want to do in the future.
My friend, I think you're too pessimistic about Warwick as a university. It is to many people in our school not their safety, but they're a target university, my friend. So I bid you to be a bit more kind with your words. They were already very nice to send you a very early offer. But I do have to admit, there is that feeling that, like, surely I cannot mess this up now after I've gotten so far. Especially when the offer is like ABB with a EPQ of a C, and we already got like an EPQ of an A star. So I'm like, well, surely I'm not going to mess this up anymore. But
I think Josh's York offer is slightly worse than Warwick's, because Warwick's one is AAA. Your ABB one is it's truly a safety. But you know what I'm concerned about in university? Like, it seems to me that I don't really care about the courses, not that much, in the sense that I can basically self-study. I just don't want to live with idiots for 3 years of my life. That's the kind of feeling that I have. Did you have something similar?
I've been thinking about the same thing. It's less about living with idiots, but more about, like, I think being in a university, I was like, being with university, that doesn't make sense. But being in a university determines a lot more than just like your education, because I think at the end of the day, most of what we're going to learn in university is going to be coming from ourselves. Like, Warren Zhu is not going to learn everything based on the course, but through his own self-reading. And in the same way, I think that it's nice to have a good course, but at the same time, you want to be with smart people and potentially be business partners in the broadest term in the future, or maybe partners, like wives, or finding a good wife. I mean, that's very important. Like, you don't want to go to like some random school where like you're not very you don't have a very close connection with them. Definitely.
Yeah, I've been listening to a podcast, and it's pretty entertaining, by Scott Adams, like that famous cartooner who drew Gilbert, and he's like, one thing that you have to learn about men is that no matter what they do, they can say that they're doing this for this reason and that reason, but ultimately they're just doing it for women. And I think it's very, very accurate. Like when I really sit down and think, why do I want to go to a good university? I realize that I just don't want to. I just don't want to. I just want to find a romantic partner that is relatively interesting, rather than being with people who are not of sufficient, maybe moral and intellectual caliber.
Mhm. I think that is definitely a very interesting idea, and I think it ties into, well, what exactly are the purpose of universities? Because the question in the comment now, due to new situations in Hong Kong, I wouldn't directly answer the question. I hope you will understand why I don't directly answer the question. But what do you exactly think is the purpose of universities? And do you think there is indeed a danger of possible propaganda or brainwashing being introduced into a university system?
Well, I guess there's two ways of answering. There's first the state universities, but also I've read a very interesting Reddit thread. No, not Reddit. I think Quora. So on it, it was asking who studies gender studies, and then beneath it's like this Chinese student who's like, do not go to gender studies. There's this Marxist studies in Chinese universities, and every single person inside Marxist studies, they feel very ashamed of themselves because they know that the field is very ideologically driven. And I hope that I won't get caught tomorrow and thrown into jail. But, but he basically said it's very ideologically driven, and then everyone inside basically knew that they're being a fake, but they're just lying to each other and congratulating each other on their sort of scholarship, even though all of them it's basically just a show. And I think it may be the same thing in some subjects in Western universities, but for me, I think that the problem about the current idea of university is that you have the idea that when I go to university, I'm going to take this course, and after I finish the course, I do well in the grades, etc. I just don't have to study. I can go and party and play. But instead, for me, when you go to university, you should work your ass off first, because you spend so much money. It's so damn expensive that you're just, whether even if it's your parents' money, you shouldn't just squander it. But also, at the end, you won't be able to learn that much just from the courses, but you have to rely on yourself. And in that case, I think the purpose of university is that it gives young people this 3 to 4 years of time where they have complete freedom to learn whatever they want, and it's a wonderful thing to have. What do you think, Josh?
I definitely agree with you. I think it's very important to just pick up on your last point there, is to just say, well, I definitely agree with you. It's so important to make the most of this time. I mean, it doesn't necessarily matter in exactly what perspective you're approaching this from, whether you're trying to come out of university with like a wife, or whether you're coming out of it with a good education or a good discussion or anything like that. I mean, tying it back to our first discussion, but at least you have to find like a purpose, a telos to your education, and really try to make the most of it in that way, because yes, it is very expensive, and yes, you're paying so much money, especially in the US, and you're really thinking about the situation. You're like, well, what exactly does it matter? What exactly is the point of paying so much for university? It really isn't about the education. Like, you could read the books, you may as well could read the books somewhere else, and that's exactly the point. Now turning back to your idea about the possible brainwashing or the possible kind of situation, I think a story by Yeon Ming Park is very apropos here. She went to Columbia, and I'm wondering whether you heard this story before, but she essentially went to Columbia and studied like evolutionary science or something like that. And then her response was, I literally just came from North Korea. Mate, the propaganda in this course is greater than the one I had back in North Korea. And I was like, surely not. I mean, Columbia is one of the biggest universities in the world, and I'm like, well, surely you cannot have that big of a problem. Maybe it's just a twist, or maybe that's just a perspective of the situation. But I think there definitely is that fear, of course, of that bias, and perhaps natural discussion we can go on from here is exactly what is the purpose of education? Is it meant to teach kids the books themselves, the content in the books, or is it there to teach kids perhaps a further idea or a further kind of knowledge about how to think or something along those lines? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I want to pick up with Harry's comment inside the chat. He's talking about, well, it seems to him and probably to us that the only reason that you want to go to a university is if you're pursuing sort of a natural science, a maths, or an engineering degree, or medicine or law, or else it's just not worth going in. But it seems to me that there's something right about it, in the sense that most humanities inside a university is quite corrupt, and you would be able to learn humanities outside of university much easier, I think, compared to self-learning maybe science and maths, although that definitely can be done. But at the same time, it would also be a shame if university becomes this vocational training unit. I think I really love vocational training universities, and we should have more of them. But at the same time, we need some general purpose universities, what we call quote unquote liberal arts, that extends beyond just learning the mathematical, the scientific disciplines, but extends into the humanities. Because for me, it's only when you've learned the humanities that you can resist these kind of ideology, these brainwashing that we talked about. Else, once you neglect the humanities, then it'll become once you ignore humanities, then you'll end up in a situation that we have right now, whether in China or in the rest of the world, in the sense that people with, I guess, political interest will invade, and they will take over because no one else knows how to argue with them. Because we got brilliant engineers, we got brilliant mathematicians, but we don't have brilliant thinkers in some sense, or general thinkers.
I definitely agree with that idea, and I think it's just so important that we learn how to interact with other people and really learn how to think. And I think that should be really the goal of modern education in some sense, because I think what we necessarily say, and I was talking to one of my seemingly, according to Warren, cultish followers recently, and then we were talking about what exactly is the purpose of education, and my immediate response was just to teach people how to think and not necessarily how to what to think, because of course you could say, well, it's very nice to just say, well, oh, okay, let's teach them the truth in the textbook, and 1 + 1 = 2. But well, where exactly does that get you to what do you actually establish from that? And because I think that there's a very thin line between what we so-called accept as scientific general knowledge and what is actually a very important and integral and controversial in the scientific and knowledge sense a field in science. And I think this could tie.
Gosh, are you going to push your Bible creationism?
No, indeed not. I was not going to. That was not indeed an idea, nor is something I necessarily hold. Though, of course, now that my friend has raised the Bible and Genesis, I think I could point you towards the biblical series, which has been going on our channel. Although it hasn't gotten many views, I do think it is quite a worthwhile series to tune into. And if you don't want to watch the long videos, you can watch the short videos, which I do upload on a regular basis. But I think this idea perfectly ties into, perhaps, and I've completely lost my train of thought, but I think it ties into the idea of anti-vaxxers and vaccination kind of prompters, or climate activists, or vaccination activists, or whatever you want to call them. And it's the idea that when you teach someone the textbook, you give them like, okay, sodium reacts with water, scientific knowledge. Now you look at something more like, oh, weather's changing, scientific knowledge, and then suddenly climate change, scientific knowledge. Like there's immediate change, a small subtle change within the the quality, the strength of each of these cases, which is not necessarily the same, but the problem is it is being presented in exactly the same way as the same level of truth or the same level of support. Now, I'm not saying each of these are correct or false. I'm just making an observation about the situation as a whole and how people's approach to these situations are a bit different. I know you have a few thoughts about this kind of global phenomena of late.
Yes, I've had a bit more thoughts now after reading some Hannah Arendt and also some Fireban, I think. He's very interesting. He's got this book called Against Method, which basically says that science does not follow any method, but it's exactly being irrational and having this kind of humanistic education that allows you to do science better. And that Galileo actually used propaganda and bad arguments to persuade everyone else for them to accept their theory. Because in fact, the church was actually more rational based on 16th century standards and even today's standards than Galileo's theory. Because whenever you have like a new theory, it's always incomplete and weak, and you have to be irrational in order to progress. And even more than being irrational, you have to be able to immerse yourself in some other paradigm, maybe in some biblical paradigm or some, I don't know, some Taoist paradigm when you're engaged in scientific endeavors. Because only when you learn some other system of belief can you stand from a point outside of the scientific paradigm, perhaps in Archimedean point, from which you can examine the presuppositions of science and for yourself to progress. What I've thought about this is that science is wonderful, but the problem is when science becomes truth. So science is good, but scientism is horrible. Hannah Arendt made this argument in The Origins of Totalitarianism. Of course, I'm not saying our society is totalitarian, although there are some societies that are rather totalitarian. I won't name names in case. But what happens is science becomes scientism, and scientism equates itself with truth rather than doxa, opinion, or theory, or well supported belief. Because scientism, in some sense, and that's what we see right now, is in contrast with the true spirit of science. Because what is wonderful about science and why it's led to the death of God is that, well, science is antithetical to truth. Truth does not exist in the lexicon of science. Instead, you have models after models and after models, hypothesis after hypothesis. There's nothing is stable, but you can always challenge everything that you know, and that's the beauty of science, and also its danger. Thinking about Nietzsche's warning, and it seems to me that what is happening today is that this science becomes scientism, and scientism betrays basically the premise, the basic spirit of science, and leads to danger. She made the argument that in totalitarian societies, whether you're a Marxist, so you believe in the scientific theory of history, where scientific theory of class struggle, which progresses throughout history to a final utopia, or a scientific racism in terms of the Nazis, where the Jews must be bad. And if I observe that the Jews are actually not as bad as I thought, and this can be the best definition of ideology, I would just think that, well, they're lying to me. They're pretending that they're being good, and I don't incorporate new observations and into my belief system and use them to question what I believe. Instead, I just basically devour what I see into what I already know, and don't change what I know already.
Mm-hmm. I think that's definitely a very true point, and I think illustrates perfectly what science is lacking so much, that what they're actually focusing on, instead of focusing truly on really what does it mean to be the truth, what science normally says is they disguise that they're searching for the truth without a further not ideological, but a further structured system beyond them. And I think that the best way to illustrate this would be kind of like, you can have a ship going in the sea, but without a captain, you really don't know where the ship is going to. You can put a sail on the ship so it floats forever, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it has a proper direction. I think that that is exactly the problem of scientism, such that it's going in that direction without necessarily having the same kind of direction it needs from the external system. And that ties perfectly into your objection. Now, a dear Russian friend has also joined the chat, and I apologize, my friend. I honestly cannot read Russian. I think you must have said something very kind, but I generally cannot read that, which is
maybe he sent like a Pornhub link or something.
No, I do know this viewer, and unlike some people who I've been very grateful, and I think this ties in perfectly with our discussion about society, is that the amount of inappropriate links, let's leave it at that, has actually been reduced. The number of bots there has been reduced, and it's something which I enjoy a lot, because as a YouTuber, especially for a Christian channel, I do keep quite a strict eye on my YouTube comment section. I don't mind disagreeing opinions, but the moment they post inappropriate links, so I make sure it's almost like the moment I see the name, I already know it's a bot, and that's how smart or how intuitive I've gotten to it. But I definitely agree with Harry Stark when he says science is missing philosophy. Science really does need that philosophy. Science really needs further guidance to it. Now, do you want to talk a bit more about kind of the relationship of religion in China? Because I think that's definitely a very interesting discussion. I shall try to go Google translate that Russian phrase, because I want to actually know what it is. I've become very curious. Do you want to talk about that in the meantime?
Yeah, well, I don't know, because personally I'm not a Christian. Josh should be more knowledgeable about this. But from what I know, it is very strange, because I think Christianity has been growing extremely fast in China. I think it's the fastest place of growth around the world. Although it seems to me that there are a lot of these fake Christians in China where they've gotten to a terrible place inside their life, and they're like, they don't know what to believe, and then like some missionaries go up to them, and then it's like, and then I just ask them to believe in Christianity, and then they just superficially go into it. I think my mom is part of the group. My mom's like, she's a Christian.
Your mom's becoming Christian, but then is like a radical kind of weird Christian that we've all been like questioning. So I'm like, who's this weird lady in my comment section? Oh, it's Warren Zhu's mom.
No, she's more like a Christian who doesn't do anything, who is not Christian at all. Like, but I think I remember when I was like 5 or 6 years old, she still wore a cross. And when I'm like 12, she got nothing around that's Christian. She never reads the Bible. She doesn't go to church. She doesn't pray. She doesn't celebrate Christmas or Easter.
My friend, this is truly hilarious.
She calls herself Christian.
No, but I think that is exactly the point of what Christianity is in China, because I've been doing quite a lot of research on it, and what they do in China is this very deceitful. I don't want to call it deceitful, because I don't want to end up somewhere I don't want to end up tomorrow. But essentially what they have is this system where they basically have these mega churches, but essentially instead of having a mega church, what they actually have is a preacher, but that preacher is actually like posted there by the Chinese government. So like when you actually listen to the sermons, they never talk about Jesus being God or Jesus being the Son of God. It's like Jesus is a good person, but then they don't talk about anyone being Jesus, put Jesus as the front of the life, because necessarily that is meant to be the Communist Party. So essentially there is this kind of idea where they want to bring in the Christian element so that they don't get like hated by the West, but at the same time they don't go as far to allow free approaches to religion, which is very interesting. Now I've come back with what the Russian means. It says good afternoon, brothers, and that means good afternoon to you as well. No hablas ruso, pero si hablas español es verdad, puedo hablar español también. And okay, so now that we've talked about this nature of Christianity in China, though I think it definitely is a very fascinating thing, because of
actually,
course,
yeah. Well, I've got another hypothesis that I want to discuss. There was a period in China in like the 1950s, 60s where they really wanted to suppress Buddhism, and they sort of tore down the temples, etc. and it didn't go very well. And it seems to me that there was a new method that was adopted, which was actually much more insidious in the sense that they welcomed Buddhism. They were like, good, uh, go go Buddhism. But what they did was they they incorporated they made Buddhism so superficial that it became less an authentic religion than just something that people wear. As in, there are a ton of these Buddhist temples inside China that people just like to visit. But when you go in, it is so horribly done, in a sense that you've got people sort of asking for money, or you've got these terrible performances that sort of just butcher everything uh, genuine about the religion. That people have this aversion towards the religion just because it becomes so common and superficial. And it seems to me that this is a much better way to destroy genuine religious belief than opposing it, because I think it's one of the features of genuine belief that the more you oppose it, the stronger can one believe in it.
I definitely agree with you, and I think that this perfectly represents the idea of perhaps having this nature, this system where what we do see is I think this area where what is so beautiful about Christianity is exactly the parts which is against or is the antithesis of what we do understand or what we do love about Christianity. And it's by changing those parts, which on face value is Christianity, but in its back is not, really is what harms Christianity the most. It's exactly why I think society has become so secular. This is exactly why I think people like Richard Dawkins, these so-called scientists, are just so effective. Is because they're like, well, this is Christianity, provide a list of things which seem very, very Christian, but in reality, in the back of it, it actually isn't as Christian as what you think it is. And I think that it is exactly that, a gap. It is exactly that kind of the hidden straw man, the hidden premise of the straw man, which is exactly the biggest problem, perhaps, of these kind of ideas. What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree. And there's also another danger, and that religion always, I think, corrupts itself over time. It's a law of entropy, right? And what happens is, once there are certain practices that are sort of catered to the common, or to the vulgar, if I'm to be an elitist, and people spot it and say, well, if that's Christianity, I don't want anything to do with it. What happens is they throw the baby out of the bathwater when there are wonderful insights in Christianity, since it basically analyzes 2,000 years of Western thought, which people just dismiss because they hear, okay, that's Christianity. It's what I associate with certain superficial doctrines, and therefore I will reject it wholesale, no matter its content.
And just to respond to this, can we translate some of my videos into Russian? Sure, go ahead and translate them and put them on your channel if you want to. I mean, if you put like the link to these videos in such that people can, like, if they come across it in the English way and they want to come over, then I'll love to allow you guys to use the videos. I mean, this is just really to share our ideas with other people. So feel free to take our videos and use them in like Russian or whatever. That's always very welcome.
Oh yeah, Josh, you remember that video that you saw on Pornhub of like people teaching calculus?
Oh yeah, so basically, essentially, I was going over I was going on my Instagram feed, and I was like, these people are. I was like, what's going on recently? Because there's this Hong Kong, what do you call it? There's this Hong Kong website that I follow on Instagram, and they always point towards really weird stuff. And I was like, and there was like, of course, Hong Kong people, Chinese people love maths, right? So they came about like, Hong Kong people love math so much that they're sharing the latest calculus on like Pornhub. And I was like, what the hell is this? I sent it to Warren Zhu, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a bit of a madness. What's going on here? And I think that's exactly kind of what we see in society, is that, and I wouldn't say I'm not guilty of it as well, but it's like this kind of idea that you want to share your knowledge, but you end up sharing it in the weirdest places just so it gets more views, if you got what I mean. It's like, I don't possibly see what other motivations the math teacher has of sharing his mathematics. Maybe that's what's going to happen with Warren Zhu's Existential Mathematics Society.
But I think it's a very interesting phenomenon, because if you actually look into it, and I've done my investigation, and I only go on porn websites to do to investigate the current ideological field, or the current postmodern subjectivity. But I can't defend myself. But if you look closely into these things, what you see is they actually get a lot of views. It's very strange. And related to this math video phenomenon, there's another phenomenon on Pornhub. I'm not sure whether you've noticed it. There's this kind of reaction video trend where the reaction to the actual video gets more views than the actual video, and you get reaction of the video, when it becomes that it seems to be more erotic for one to see people react to a video than actually watching the video itself. I just find it fascinating. I've got some thoughts on it, but I'll just see what are some of your reactions to it.
No, I haven't observed that phenomenon there, but I've actually observed it on YouTube, because I'm the guy who stays more on YouTube side of things. I'm not sure what Warren Zhu is doing. Of course, he probably took down his YouTube channel after he diverted his attention to other places. But essentially, my thoughts about the reaction phenomenon is very weird, and I'm not sure whether your insights are purely erotic, and hence my videos would not necessarily translate very well to your kind of concepts. However, I think that the idea of the response, however, is something very different in the sense that a lot of people like enjoying or viewing the reaction of the other. It's kind of how you want to show your appreciation or your knowledge of culture through the big other, or to society as a whole. But then the only way you do it is via reactions of others, and you want to just fit into that societal kind of knowledge or thought in general.
Oh, okay. You know what I see in the porn reaction videos, and I think it relates back to yours, but I'm not sure about the relationship yet. But it feels to me that it is successful, because what men, at least, is finding inside porn, it's not really the actual action, but it's more the kind of enjoyment of the other, or the seeing of the subjectivity of the other, and that's what men enjoy. And what you see in a reaction video is that you're seeing this pure subjectivity bursting out of the person reacting. So what you're noticing is just the kind of interactions that you have in the sense in which what is fun inside dating. It's not just like going to bed together, but these small movements in between to get the other onto bed. You get what I mean? So like testing and then seeing whether she likes it, etc. And that's where enjoyment comes from. And for me, the reaction video shows the exact same phenomenon, because what you're interested in is just the subjectivity of the other, instead of what are you searching, Josh? Instead of the actual action.
No, but I think that's
Josh, you muted yourself.
My mic is on.
I know this is a Christian channel, but I think this is. I'm not saying anything explicit. I'm just analyzing concepts.
Indeed. I do understand, but I think that what exactly is very interesting here, or at least what we can note perhaps before we move on to discuss something else, is precisely this kind of interaction between the kind of the, or at least I think what we should talk about perhaps, and since this is indeed about society, is necessarily the relationship between what we see as kind of this casual hookup culture in society and what we do see in pornography and also in a genuine love relationship. Because I think that each one of those have similarities in them, but also are significantly different individually as well. And I think that was what I was trying to get to. I think that that's perhaps somewhere where we can draw inspiration or understanding from.
Mm-hmm. Although just one last comment, I on a very theoretical level, for me, this reaction video, whether on YouTube or on more explicit websites, does point to something inherent in subjectivity, inherent to human beings as such. What subjectivity is always mediated in the sense that I never directly see something, or I never directly experience, but I always experience myself as experiencing. And it is this reflexivity, this mediation in subjectivity that the feeling of enjoyment derives. Lacan has this wonderful expression called surplus enjoyment. And enjoyment is when you see someone else enjoying and you enjoy it yourself. Or even you see yourself enjoying and you enjoy your own enjoying. And for me, that's constitutive of subjectivity as such, this mediation. And maybe there's something to it in the Christian idea of Trinity. I don't know if I'm getting crazy here, because I normally sleep at like 9:30, so it's very late in the night for me. But
I don't think you're getting crazily, or I don't think you're getting crazy in any sense of the word, but I do think that at the same time there is some sense of, I definitely agree with you. I think that there is some sense of enjoyment to the situation as well, but perhaps we can discuss meta enjoyment. Do you think that is the best way to put it, my friend?
Yes, meta enjoyment. But I think we have to investigate the Trinity. You think the meta enjoyment? Well, there's the question of why did God send Jesus down down on earth and suffer? I think if you interpret this in a very heretical way, you can say that because God loved Jesus so much, there was this surplus enjoyment, this meta enjoyment of seeing Jesus suffer, and God the Father himself suffering, whilst noticing that he himself is suffering and gaining pleasure, gaining enjoyment in his own suffering, which led to him sending Jesus down into earth.
I think you've truly gone mad, my friend. I genuinely think that we've reached a point where I finally understood where you've gone completely mad. It's like it's quite funny, but I think that tying it back onto a closer kind of a situation is exactly, I think, to perhaps more personal, or at least not personal, but more grounded terms. I don't think necessarily this kind of idea of enjoyment necessarily ties back to the Trinity. I don't necessarily think that link is valid in any sense of the imagination, though.
You see, that's the problem with society, Josh. We don't have any imagination. We need to.
No, but then there's a difference between there's a difference between having imagination and making a links between completely two irrelevant things as well. It's like yes, I can have an imagination between this stick and like my phone, or maybe, but I can't have an imagination between this and a waterfall. Like, you got to be a bit mad to do that, or something along those lines, right? So I think that there is indeed a classification where imagination just goes out the window, and it just goes from imagination to complete absurdity. Like, you call someone who dreams that you call someone who has dreams about people murdering him out of no reason a madman, not necessarily a guy with good imagination. So I think that there is definitely
well, if that's the case, then I'm madman.
Indeed, no, but I think that dreams are a bit of a different situation. But I hope you get the analogy, though I perhaps I perhaps think we can move on to perhaps the idea of the relationship, the pornography and the hookup culture, because I think that's perhaps a good place where we can end this. We've talked about love, we've talked about college, but perhaps this is perhaps the biggest kind of conflict.
Well, actually, before this, I'll tell you a very strange dream that I had. I think like 3 months ago. I think it'll be very interesting, very apropos what your comment on a mad person in the dream. It was like I was like in school, and then Kalan Sharma, one of my old friends, the viewers probably won't know, managed to discover a new physical equation that went beyond quantum physics and general relativity. And then he was finding a way to write it down. It's like somehow he had to find the printer and print out all the equations about of the new physical, I don't know, new standard model beyond standard relative, beyond quantum physics and general relativity. And when he prints this new sheet out, like the universe would just start collapsing and exploding. But then somehow, like, something was wrong with the world, so he had to print out that sheet, and then he hired me to do it with him. And then we were like, okay, if we print out that damn sheet, like, we're all gonna die. Like, it would probably the printer will explode, and the printer will explode, and everyone inside the school will just die out. But I was like, okay, Callum, that's fine. We have to do it to save the world. So we went in arduously. We found this printer at the bottom, at the basement. Josh would know. We have this sports hall inside a sports hall, like underneath the normal floor. It's like in the ground floor. We have a sports hall, and then behind the sports hall we have a PE teacher like changing room and gym room. And we found a printer inside the gym room. We're like, okay, this is the deepest place we can go inside the school, and we printed out that piece of paper with all the equations on it. And then we just felt like the universe shaking and everything. And like, fuck, we're going to die. And then when I was like running out, I was like, okay, I'm going to die. What did I actually feel? Sorry, Josh, I actually didn't really think about you. As there's someone I liked. I'm like, fuck. I need to like see her again. I just look around the crowd. I'm like, fuck. She's nowhere. And then I don't know. It's a very messy story, but it's just interesting to share.
Mm-hmm. I think it's very interesting because you've told me this dream before, and it's quite interesting. And I think that one part which I think is very weird is the idea that to save the world you must destroy it. And I think that is actually a very Christian idea in its core. And maybe that's because my friend was reading more theistic literature as a result of me, but I think that there is indeed necessarily some sense of the very act of fixing yourself is the act of forsaking it, and that in order to overcome the greatest hurdle in your life is to give up the greatest thing which you have within you. And it turns out in your situation that what you love the most is not necessarily what you love the most, because the girl goes missing. But at the same time, that is the only thing you think about. So it's like by overcoming that hurdle, you have figured out what you love the most, and that what you got rid of to destroy or to help yourself is indeed something which isn't actually the true motive. And I think that is exactly what we see in the Christian narrative about bearing your cross, lay down your life, and follow me. It's exactly that idea of you must give up what you think or what you thought before is the most important thing. The relationship with the world, what you see in the world. You give that up and you realize that what is the most important thing all along was your relationship with God, the divine. I think that is exactly the mirror of your dream. And I think that that's something profound. And it's like, it's a moment you gave up the world that you realize that you couldn't find what you thought previously was there, and you couldn't find it, but then you realize it was there all along. And that is the symbolic relationship of the lover within your dream. And that destruction is that
I think you explained it much better than I could ever think about it. But just to connect to it, there's two key Bible passages that I think support your point. There's one where like Jesus came over with a sword, and it's a very enigmatic passage. And there's another one in Luke 14:26, where it says, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brother and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple." So somehow, the Christian, to become a Christian or to devote oneself to something meaningful, one has to do violence to some part of oneself, and maybe that's part of the dream. Mm-hmm. It's only doing violence to that part of myself that I realized what I really wanted.
I think that's definitely very, very true and a very, very beautiful analysis. Now, I'm not necessarily sure whether you want to go on and discuss the relationship between pornography, love, and also hookup culture, which I think is definitely a very interesting conversation. Do you want to go through that?
If you have time, please just go on. Like I enjoy talking, So
I think
if you got time, I think we can talk all day. I don't care.
indeed. I think that is a very good idea. We could perhaps talk, and then it turns out that our friends who are watching in America realize it's night before we even finish. But I think we can definitely continue. And I think that this idea of the hookup culture these days is just so weird. And I promise you, it's not because of something that I'm very salty because I can't get any of it myself, because definitely that is not the case. I think it might be the case for Warren Zhu, but it definitely isn't the case for me. but I definitely
for me it's because I'm very selective.
Indeed. No, but I think being selective is
difficult.
very good. It's very important, because I think the fact of the hookup culture is that it is not selective at all. And that is fundamentally the problem of it. It's not about the general relationship, but rather about an exchange. And I think that is what we've talked about previously before as a problem, but it's kind of the idea of the reduction of of sex or whatever the thing is into a mere commodity, instead of viewing it as something which is important and has intrinsic value within itself.
Mm-hmm. I think one can even make a Marxist analysis of this. Not saying that Marxism is correct, but here it's very apropos. He said the logic of capitalism, although I hate using that word, is that the relations not only occur inside life, inside a shopping mall, but somehow you manage to eternalize it and then bring it inside your own home. That happens with all ideology. That what is a local phenomenon comes back to you with a vengeance inside your most prized, the most prized elements of your life, and destroys it. And in here it's this exchange. And what's very interesting about exchange is that Marx talked about it when he said this splitting of value, splitting of a commodity into use value and exchange value, and then putting the two value to the use and exchange value together inside socially necessary labor time, which defines value, period. And socially necessary labor time becomes this I guess homologizing and universally homologizing phenomenon that takes everything, all things with quality, all things with certain use values, into just flat exchange, just flat money, flat dollars. And what it does is it turns quality into quantity. And once it becomes quantity, then meaning disappears, because what is meaningful to us cannot be what cannot be quantified can be meaningful to us. But once it is quantified, it ceases to be meaningful because it can be exchanged.
I think that's definitely true, and I think that is exactly the problem, perhaps, of the hookup culture. Though I really wonder where exactly did it come from, because I don't necessarily think that it came from a lack of people's ability to have sex, because I don't necessarily think that is exactly the cause of hookup culture. I think it is that definitely plays a part of it. Now, my friend probably is going to get water or something else along those lines, but I definitely think that one part of the problem, perhaps, is some kind of personal need or some personal requirement to find or rebel against the symbolic order, or they see the symbolic order as an oppressive force against them, or they see kind of tradition and they view it as an evil and they want to rebel against it. And I mean, that ties in with the sin narrative, and as Harry Stark says, like, it does come in this promiscuity does come from pre-Christian paganism and is found in the Roman Empire. And I think that's true. And there's this kind of idea of the conflict between the physical desires and the intellectual desires, perhaps the higher and lower pleasures of male to some degree, though I do think that the rebellion perhaps goes further than that, and I'm not exactly sure what are your thoughts about exactly the sources of it, because I do think it is a tying between rebellion, lack of an ability to have it, lack of control, but it seems that there has to be some further gelling kind of concept behind it, which I seem to not be able to figure out.
I disagree with the rebellion part.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't seem to me to be a rebellion so much as the predominant logic of the day. Or, well, Foucault has this brilliant passage, even though I don't like Foucault, that power has the very resistance to power can be incorporated into power. And I think this describes the hookup culture perfectly. And it is this very resistance that which makes you feel like a renegade, that turns you mainstream, or makes you ideologically possessed.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think that mainstream, that kind of idea of power, could also be applicable to modern leftist or even rightist kind of ideology in social media? Do you think that kind of corrupting nature of power, not necessarily corrupting is the right word, but that kind of aspect of power can be applicable to these other kind of streams of thought as well?
Although I wouldn't want to use the word power. It's the word Foucault uses, because for me, power is not a bad thing. He uses it as a terrible thing, but we all want some power. We want some control over our lives. And as Hannah Arendt said, power is generated from collective activity with each other in a community, in contrast with violence, which is just striking people down. And power can be a very empowering thing. And so we say you should empower yourself. And it's not something terrible. And when you say that power is terrible, and maybe this links to something that may connect to the hookup culture. When you say power is bad, you leave people almost meaningless, or I don't know. You stop them from improving themselves. You make life rather nihilistic. But I've lost my train of thought. But you can continue.
Mm-hmm. I think that here it says Tolkien and the Ring dealt with power, how power corrupts. Completely agree with you. I mean, if it wasn't for talking about Dostoevsky, I'll happily have made Lord of the Rings series on this channel as well. And I mean, actually, if you guys want me to talk about Lord of the Rings, the lore, let me know. I'll actually love to make a Lord of the Rings series where I just talk full in about Tolkien, the Tolkien verse, about Middle Earth. I actually love the history of Lord of the Rings. So if you want me to talk about that, I'll happily make that as a series on this channel as well. But essentially, I was thinking about kind of the nature of this kind of force, and power is not exactly the right word, is that I think you're definitely right when you tie it to hookup culture, and perhaps it kind of explains some of the similarities between hookup culture and a relationship, such that while they seem to be completely diametrically opposed, they do have elements of similarity between them. For example, you see, of course, there's that physical kind of bonding which you see in both situations, which I don't think is the only similarity, but it's kind of that I want to replicate parts of that relationship, but I do not have the commitment to fully go through with all the other attachments to that relationship. And I want to have, it's kind of like I want my cake and eat it too kind of situation. It's kind of the idea that you want to have the relationship, the good parts of the relationship, but cut out all the more negative, or at least the more grave, the more serious parts of the relationship, like the struggling with anxiety, the self kind of, the dependence, the kind of the more responsibility, that side of the relationship is then taken away during a hookup culture or something along those lines.
I agree with you. It's the two main words that you said, commitment and responsibility, is what's lacking. But it's also lacking in such a way that one does not, people perhaps don't know that somehow taking responsibility has its difficult side, but at the same time, it is also wonderfully fulfilling. And there is, I don't want to say like we're living in a consumer society. We always want instant gratification, but the analysis in some way is correct. But it seems to me that you have to go deeper than just saying it's human nature to want instant gratification. If it seems to me that it's because people don't know what they want to do in life fundamentally. Although it's part of the human condition to not know who I want to be, and to dwell inside a certain meaninglessness and struggle with it. But a certain escape from it is just this kind of pursuit of pleasure, and it's an escape that it's escaping from something existential. I think the escape is not trivial. It's like when I'm reading the phenomenology of spirit. It's like before I'm thinking, okay, I need to sit down and start reading Hegel's terrible fucking prose, and I would always go on my laptop and like go on YouTube for like half an hour before I can actually settle down and start reading Hegel. I think it's a similar thing with a certain hookup culture. It's just that maybe they didn't manage to go to this part where they start to read Hegel.
I definitely agree with you. And I think that this kind of existential problem is at the heart of this issue. But now and I think, where do you think necessarily does this existential problem come from? Do you think it's like Nietzsche, where he says that existential problem came from the fall of Christianity as a predominant worldview? Do you think that that is the cause of the existential crisis? Because I think that definitely plays a part in it, in the way that Christianity does provide a solid worldview upon which you can ground your life, upon which shields you in some ways from this kind of existential angst or this existential nihilism. Though at the same time, I would like to say that the flip side is also true, where if you purely go Christian without becoming a full-on Christian, perhaps like your mother, perhaps I think that what you do notice is that Christianity is then not only as nihilistic as what if you weren't a Christian in the first place, but even more nihilistic than if you were a Christian in the first place. Because if you're assuming you take up the idea of you must forsake what you hold most in order to find what you most need, what you then notice that if you don't go the full way, what you do is that you end up losing what you want most, and then you never get what you most need, which means you've destroyed everything, which gets even worse than the hookup area and this kind of this atheistic nihilist stage. You go even worse from that. So it seems that there is a two-way kind of double-edged problem of nihilism and Christianity.
Well, I would agree with some of what you said about Christianity. It's a wonderful place of wisdom, but what I feel is that this existential crisis sort of is not a bad thing. It's a very positive thing, in that Heidegger had the I'm a Heidegger fan, but he said anxiety is a fundamental attunement with the world, and it's anxiety that the world discloses itself to you as groundless, which is a truth in the sense of aletheia, revealing. So somehow anxiety allows the world to reveal itself in its truth to you. And the problem is, how do you dwell inside this anxiety and what you do in relation to it?
I definitely agree with you. Go ahead.
For me, I don't think the problem is with so much. We don't have a ground, and we don't have like a belief system to shield us, because it's not a very good thing either to have a belief system that we're just born into and we just believe. I think it's just as bad as hookup culture. What I think is, it is right that there's a certain break in tradition, as Hannah Arendt said, that characterizes modernity, and what we have to do is to stretch ourselves into the past and into the future, and learn to dwell inside the space between past and future that we call present, in which we don't isolate ourselves from the past or from the future. And I think this may be the problem, this isolation from the past and the future, but to learn from the past and look out into the future in order to embrace the groundlessness of the present and live within it.
I think what you're saying definitely makes sense, but I necessarily think that when you're talking about kind of this lack of the grounding and the danger of having that kind of grounding in which you're living, I agree with you that questioning itself is not the problem. The problem, I think, rises is that people of this age are not taught how on earth they're meant to deal with this questioning, such that the questioning can only have negatives because they don't know how to deal with it. It's kind of like how when you're growing up as a kid, you don't want to just make the kid wear a mask the entire time, because they're just going to end up having zero immune system. In the same way, the questioning itself is like the virus. It doesn't necessarily kill you, and it makes you stronger. But the problem is that people don't know how to resolve this questioning, and as a result, it kills you instead. And I think that what you say about the flip side, having the structure being dangerous, I think I completely agree with you on that point. I think that is the dual-edged nature of of Christianity, which I was talking about, is that if you don't go full way, you end up destroying more than what you started off with. You destroy the questioning, and that actually dangers you even more. But at the same time, I think that in the same way, as long as you are able to question and actually find answers, you'll be pointed towards a better direction, path in which the questioning isn't bad in the first place, and then the existential crisis is nothing but a veil of soul building or a veil of struggle. And I think that is the best way to look at the situation, perhaps.
I would agree, but I think the problem I see is this. Pessimistically speaking, I think I was talking with one of my friends about education. She wants to apply to education in Cambridge, and I sent her this book called like Deschooling Society, which is pretty interesting. And we were like talking education, and I was like, well, it seems to me that most people are wasting their time, and most of our lives are just wasted. So I don't really have very high hopes about education, in that you just have to give a chance to people, but most people don't use it, and even people who use it don't optimize it, and that's just how human beings are. I think I'm being extremely pessimistic, but for me, that's just how it is. There's people will go into hookup culture when this opening comes, and we can do our best to help them. Or, well, we first have to examine ourselves and see whether we're so noble and pure that we can moralize other people. But even after that, there's not much more we can do, and that's it. I don't know. I think it's a very, very, very defeatist, very modern point of view.
I think that's true, and that pessimism has definitely gotten into my mind of late, and it's something I've worried and thought about a lot. And I honestly don't think there's much we can do on that front. And perhaps some ways it's kind of just like turning a blind eye and reaching out your hand, and not necessarily thinking too much about it, though. And that's kind of like the allegory of Jesus at the door. It's kind of like he knocks on your door, but if you don't open it, it's not necessarily his problem. And it's kind of the idea of, and of course I really hate it when the atheists say, well, oh, why didn't he give us more evidence? I'm like, well, if you looked, you would have found the evidence. But at the same time, it's like, well, if the moment you're good, because at the end of the day, if you hear what they say, like at times they're like, well, I'm like, what exactly would convince you? And they're like, well, if I saw God, and I was like, well, all right, if you saw God, then you'll believe in God. But then the moment everyone else sees God, you say that that's just a hallucination. Well, what exactly is going to happen when you see God? You're just going to say that's a hallucination as well. So there are some points where I think that no matter what people do, or no matter what you try to show someone, they will not necessarily come to it. It's only something that they could do themselves, and something that is completely out of our hands. And it's that kind of pessimism, but offering at the same time, which is the only solution that we can hold.
Well, there's that famous line, ask and you shall receive. But the key thing is you have to ask, and you have to know that there's some things that you lack in order to ask. And it's the asking is not so trivial. And that when you ask, you know that you need. And most of us don't know what we need. And I think we have to, if we're to be a pessimist, we have to extend the pessimism further. No, we shouldn't just be pessimistic about other people and what society is going to be at large, but we have to be pessimistic about ourselves, about how we can do. Like, I've been thinking about myself. Well, I've been doing pretty good compared to other people, but there are certain battles that I'm constantly fighting and always losing. Like watching gaming videos on YouTube, I can never stop, no matter how hard I try. And there's a saying from Hegel that I love, which is evil lies in the gaze which sees evil everywhere. And if we're to be pessimistic and see evil everywhere, we have to first see evil inside ourselves. And I guess that's just my suggestion.
I definitely agree with you on that one, and I think that I personally have also, like you, struggle as well in a lot of other things, and but perhaps different struggles because, of course, everyone's individual. But I think it's a very difficult fight that you must. It's kind of like that cross you have to bear, and I think we all have that cross. We all know what it is, and it's not necessarily something you share publicly, but it is something that you have to struggle and fight against on a daily basis. That kind of bearing your cross daily, even though it is almost crushing. It's a colossal weight. And that's why when we're talking about these situations, it's not something which is very easy to just throw away. It's not very easy to say, well, I'm struggling about this situation and those people are flawed, those people are this, while we're just trying to moralize about it. No, it's not something like that, but it's rather something that we do understand how difficult the problem is, and especially when you don't understand that that is a problem in the first place. That is one of the biggest struggles, one of the biggest fights that you must have, and it is that kind of balance between the two, which is just so important to maintain, I suppose.
Well, I got a question for you, Josh.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking. So, what do you think would take me, you, to convince me of God? I mean,
I don't think there's anything I can do possibly. I mean, I can have a long-winded debate about whether God exists logically or not, but I've never been one of those people who believe that using the Kalam argument or using the cosmological argument or the ontological argument will get anyone to believe in God. I personally just don't think that's possible. I mean, some people do think that is possible, and a lot of people who watch my videos and lots of people who I talk to genuinely believe, and I think that they definitely must have some reason to believe in it. And maybe it's true that it works for some people, that if they prove logically that God exists, they will believe in God. But I'm pretty sure from knowing you and knowing most people that I know, it's not necessarily something that would work. I don't think that if I gave you a cosmological argument and argued it to an area where you have absolutely no response to any of my arguments, you'll actually believe in God. Would I be able to demonstrate to you that God is a reasonable belief? I think I would be able to. And I think you already believe that God is a reasonable video, though. You already believe that God is a reasonable belief, and it's not something completely crazy.
Yeah, it's not something completely crazy. But I think with my temperament, I would say fuck you to logic.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say.
But well, I've been observing how me being in love, and there's a very strange thing going on in that I am helplessly in love for the other person. In love, I don't. Is it for love for another person? And but logically, I know that she's not she's not so wonderful. She's kind of stupid. I think compared to my standards, and not very a bit lazy also, and just people say that quite arrogant and manipulative. But no matter how hard logic, my reason tells me to say, well, this person is horrible. I just can't. I can't stop falling in love, and I can't stop feeling the extreme passion for some reason. And it seems to me that that's a more Christian way to go than complete logic improving God. Or it's a certain not blind, but a certain belief that lies in your entire person than one or two arguments. And if I was to be a Christian, I think there has to be what Kant and Luther call like a revolution of the soul. But I think it's an impossible situation, and that's it's not something that can consciously be done, but has to be done almost by necessity, retroactively. I feel like I'm speaking in tongues now.
No, I think that what you point out is a very interesting thing, and I'm not exactly sure how we could possibly solve that kind of problem. And and I've never really came to these discussions to just try to make you a Christian, because that's definitely not my aim, and that's never actually came across my thought at all. And I'm like, whatever, right? And you know me, I'm always very laid back about this entire situation. But I think that, like, I'm just wondering, what do you think would make you believe in God? Because I'm always very curious about the other and how the atheist comes to becoming a Christian. Because while I grew up in a Christian family, and I wouldn't say I was a Christian my entire life, and there was a moment in which I changed, but that has never been done down to logic or reason alone. So I definitely think that logic and reason isn't like against it, but it's just kind of a different kind of realm. And mhm.
I'm thinking. I think if I feel as passionate a love for God or Christ as I feel for the person, then I think I would become a Christian. But precisely, we use the phrase falling in love. It's a certain fall down, and as a fall, it's uncontrollable. It's like a lightning strike. I think that's Lacan's definition of the subject, by the way. But for me, I think I don't know. To be honest, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Would it be
There's some
possible?
parts.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
you.
All right. Would it be possible, I'm thinking, that you perhaps already know that you love that divine being, but you just don't fully understand that you love it, and that it is through your dreams that your subconscious love is being shown, but logically and consciously, you're too afraid to accept that love that you have, because you know at the same time that you're unwilling to live up to the love that you have. I'm not sure if you understand what I'm trying to say here. But at the same time,
I think that I'm already too afraid to live up to the love that I have, and that I always think about my failings and what I have terrible misgivings about my behavior every single day, and it feels horrible sometimes, because it seems to me that I have certain things that I want to achieve in life, and perhaps you can call that love, perhaps even God. It's this knowing that what I want to be, intuiting the ideal that I want to inhabit, and a certain failure to be able to achieve it, that I think is this measuring up to the divine. And at the end, I think for me, the problem basically is that I can't accept a certain language game or a certain lexicon that perhaps we call Christian, just the same way as perhaps someone from, I don't know, America cannot accept the entire Confucian bullshit. Oh no, not bullshit, like Confucian Confucian jargon. That comes over. Hold on, I'm not a Confucian either.
I think that what you're alluding to is definitely a very interesting idea, and I think that kind of that fear or that kind of worrying is definitely, I don't think it's something that you could get rid of, because I definitely have that same feeling on a daily basis as well. It's not necessarily something which you necessarily solve or you necessarily get rid of immediately. And in fact, it's not something that you're meant to get rid of, because that existence of the conscience knows or presupposes some knowledge that you are indeed wrong or you are indeed right. And that is itself a divine intuition, perhaps, or a divine kind of knowledge, perhaps, that you've already missed the mark, even though you don't know what the mark necessarily is, or some degree, because you fear what you do not see, but it is what you do not see which then is presupposed, and that is what you probably see as God or something. And in the same way, I struggle as well, but part of that acceptance of that fear is part of the acceptance of the mark, and it's through understanding the mark in which you in which you understand the divine or something along those lines?
Josh, I got two observations about myself that I want to share with you. The first one is when I read a book that I really love and that I feel intensely meaningful when I read it, there's a certain feeling that I can't take it. I can't take it anymore. It feels too good and too meaningful that like after I read it for like 10 or 20 minutes, I have to put it down. But it's just overloading myself with a certain meaning or enjoyment, a certain heaviness. But another observation I want to share with you, you can take it however you want. I've realized that whenever I read these kind of theological literature, I just replace God with some other thing that is extremely important in my life, like my love for someone else. And for me, I'm always trying to map the phenomenon. It's always Hugh Dreyfus in his lecture talking about being on time is always find a phenomenon for what Heidegger is talking about. And you always, if you find a phenomenon of what Heidegger is talking about, then you'll be able to go through the whole thing all right. And I find that when I'm reading these Christian literature, I find the phenomenon in certain intensely meaningful relationships that I have inside my life, and it works out fine. I can match the phenomenon with what they're saying and learn about the phenomenon, the relationships through what is originally written, basically between this relation between man and God.
I think that's definitely possible, and I definitely think that's something you can. I definitely agree with your understanding of your idea of reading a book and it's so deep or so profound that you had to put it down. That's why I kind of enjoyed when reading The Idiot, or at least some of Dostoevsky's works. It was just so beautiful that I couldn't stop but put the book down and meditate on the few verses, perhaps, or some parts of James or the Gospel of John, and is so deep, or maybe the Gospel, or maybe Job as well. But I think tying into your idea about the greater phenomenon, about representing the divine with a greater love or something like that, is perfectly tied in with Tillich's idea that we are all theists. It just depends on what we view as God. And to Tillich, God is your ultimate concern, and love being your ultimate concern. That woman, that girl is going to be by nature going to fit in it to your ultimate concern, and hence is your God. And I think that's definitely a coherent way to view things. So I definitely disagree with it in the sense that does not actually fundamentally understand or respect, not necessarily respect, but give direct illustration to the grandness or the beauty of God. And I think that is exactly the key of what The Idiot does, is that the Mushkin doesn't represent God, but it's through Mushkin that you understand an aspect of the divine. It's that kind of that two-stage process which is the key. It's not a direct jump towards the divine. It's that understanding of that two-phase representation, or that two-stage representation that's key. And I recommend you to reread The Idiot, because I reread it recently, and it was deeply insightful, or at least gave me a completely different perspective of the situation. It's helping me read Don Quixote as well, which I picked up recently. But
in the Spanish version, or
yeah, in the Spanish version, it's very profound. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, well, have you ever thought about the divine, or have you ever meditated on the divine and tried to think about what you come from it, to use your knowledge of your love for the girl to change the focus perhaps to the divine or something along those lines, and see where that ends up with?
What I feel is this, that I'm not doing justice for the love if I change it into the divine. In fact, this is what Dante and Kierkegaard did. Dante he had this brilliant love for Beatrice, and then like halfway down into I don't know, like halfway down Inferno, like Beatrice disappears and then like changes. Oh no, halfway down the Inferno, Virgil disappears, because it was Virgil who took Dante into down hell, down to purgatory, and then Beatrice appears, but Beatrice as this messenger from God instead of a person with flesh and blood. And similarly for Kierkegaard, he had a love for Regina, and what happened was that after his failing inside the love, he just couldn't continue it for some reason. I think it may be similar to our idea of feeling too much meaning that we can't sustain it. That he decided to break off the engagement with Regina, and it became this devoutly religious author. And his, I think, most brilliant move is that his entire corpus, his most famous one, is this change from love for a person to love for the divine, and therefore changing from the particular to the universal, the contingent to the eternal. But for me, there's a certain sense in which meaning can be had inside this certain moment where no matter how contingent and fleeting and meaningless a certain particular moment seems, when we're looking at it objectively from the standpoint of the universe, at that moment as a subject, the at that moment as a subject, the intense feeling feels like the only thing that matters inside the world, and everything that happens feels like it happens by necessity in a different way than the necessity of the laws of nature, but necessity from yourself, as if somehow destiny drags you along, or maybe you shape destiny in some way. And that's the kind of feeling that's, I don't know, I don't feel any divine when I feel it. I feel extremely meaningful, but I don't feel anything divine. Perhaps I think it's because I don't have the imagery for it, maybe, because I'm not brought up on it. It's not part of my conceptual apparatus. And maybe I'm describing a similar phenomenon, but with a different language. I'm not sure, and that definitely changes something, because I don't want to say that being is just God. I think it trivializes being and it trivializes God at the same time.
I definitely agree with you. Mm-hmm.
And well, I got another observation I want to ask you. For me, I think part of the crisis is that we're not challenging people enough. We're not giving people difficult things. We're treating children as children rather than mature adults who can think deeply about things that matter. Instead of just giving them math problems, we have to ask them to think. Because I got the existential mathematics club in that school, and though I say that I do it just for university, in reality, I find it extremely meaningful. And the most amazing thing for me is that the year nines actually sometimes participate more than certain higher year students, where somehow when you become a year 12, year 13, like all the passion is sort of, I don't know, what's the word? All the passion has been beaten out of you, and then, but whereas for year nine, they're still extremely willing to think, and we just need more challenge rather than making things easier. We need to make things harder for people. That's what Kierkegaard said about Christianity.
Mm-hmm. I think that's definitely very true and very interesting and profound, and perhaps the only way we reach into this, and I definitely agree with you that the divine and being itself cannot be used in a univocal sense. And that's my fundamental problem with Tillich, is that he's too quick to that by making God the highest concern, he reduces everything that God does or what God means in all of the senses of what God is. But I think that perhaps the only way forward when we are faced with this situation is perhaps, well, what exactly is God? And I don't think God necessarily is something that you find immediately. And I think that there's this point where you become the centurion. And the centurion is essentially the person I'm not sure which gospel it is, but in the Gospels who says to Jesus, when Jesus heals the daughter and says, well, I know for the most fact that you do exist, but I do not exactly know that you exist. I do not believe, and hence help me with my... I believe, and hence help me with my unbelief. And it is within those ideas in which you fully understand the divine. And that is that act of retroactively knowing God. And it is about reaching that stage, which is perhaps for you, or was for me, the path to Christianity was that I believe, help me with my unbelief. I believe the retroactive, helping the unbelief which is in the future.
But I think there's a certain seed that has to be sown before you can enter this stage of subjective transformation where the event happens and you go from A to B, and retroactively A and B together becomes necessary. I think I've talked about the stage a lot. There's a romantic side of me where I think it's pretty good if there's no God, and then somehow it's very heroic, I think. Or I don't know. It seems very badass to believe that God doesn't exist. And okay, God doesn't exist, but I still love this person, and this person is as meaningful to me as God. And then, oh, how wonderful this thing is, a human existence or searching meaning inside a universe that really has no meaning. That's just a wonderful thing. And there's a certain romantic / I don't know.
That just sounds like that dumb idiot Sartre who says that let's just create everything out of nothing.
But no, I don't want to be Sartre.
No, but that is exactly how. Do you not see it within yourself? That idea of the Sartre, if God does not exist, then everything is permitted. Now let's be badasses and embrace that feeling. Do you not feel that as well, my friend? Do you not see that similarity?
I don't think it's if God exists, then
no,
everything is permitted. Yeah. If God does not exist, then everything is permitted. But instead, if God does not exist, then my fleeting relationships, the fleeting moments of meaningfulness that I have on earth becomes all the more meaningful rather than less for some reason. Or maybe it's just this romantic trope. It's like when I feel, oh, the sadder I feel, the more I suffer, the better the more I enjoy myself. And I feel like I finally become this suffering genius.
No, but I think that your point is exactly the problem with that romanticism is exactly reflected by Dostoevsky's correct translation, not Sartre's misinterpretation. Rather, Dostoevsky's correct interpretation that if God exists, if God does not exist, there is no value. And that is exactly the problem, is that if God does not exist, your act of meaning for the woman, the act of meaningfulness within the nothingness is exactly a meaningless, futile existence because it is fundamentally only chemical impulses in the brain based on purely materialistic scenarios. And that is exactly what Dostoevsky is trying to say, is that we all are creatures of meaning and of beauty, of purpose. And it's exactly in the moments of where you love people, like Nastasia, like Mushkin, in which you feel such beauty, that it is impossible for God not to exist. For if God did not exist, then those meaningless would be nothing but mere either chemical or sense impulses on a materialistic plane. And it is that very reduction which makes it impossible for us to believe in the realness of our emotions, which by our experiences of those emotions make it impossible for us not to believe in the existence of God. I think that is ultimately Dostoevsky's argument throughout The Idiot and throughout the Brothers Karamazov. It is that very fact of the great suffering and the great significance we attach to the suffering that we then understand that the world cannot purely be without a God.
I take what you're saying, but I would disagree with you. Mm-hmm. And I'm always skeptical of the line of, well, Dostoevsky said that if God does not exist, then everything is permitted or nothing has value. Because Dostoevsky did not say that. It was Ivan inside the brothers Karamazov who said that. It's clear it's not Dostoevsky, or if it's Dostoevsky, it's Dostoevsky speaking inside a persona, and I don't think it's necessarily what he really thinks. But for me, I would make even an opposite formulation, some sense, in which if God does not exist, then everything becomes much more meaningful, or things become even more valuable, in the sense that they do not need this confirmation from God. But although there's another form of belief, which is a belief in God layered upon everything that you experience right now. I think that's wonderful. But I myself do not have that kind of belief. And for me, it's precisely this lack of external grounding that makes the meaning all the more intense. And I don't think there's nothingness once God is taken out, but instead, once God is taken out, I don't think it's nothing. It's more, there's meaning, and meaning is not nothing, and meaning cannot be reduced to nothing, and meaning stays even if God is not here. Of course, you can make the silly argument or the profound argument that God is meaning, but I think it suffers the same flaw as Tillish's argument that God is being. The being and meaning perhaps is the same.
I think there you perhaps jumped the argument, but I would like to go back to perhaps your discussion about Dostoevsky is not Dostoevsky but through Ivan, and I'll disagree with that in the sense that yes, it is through Ivan, but it doesn't change the fact that it is fundamentally core. If you read the entire corpus of Dostoevsky's works, or it's more specifically The Idiot and the Brothers Karamazov, that is generally the line of argument that is being presented. So it's essentially not necessarily a very big. I don't think it is an unwarranted leap to come to that conclusion, though I do think that if we tie it into the argument, it's not necessarily that if God does not exist, then we find no meaning, but rather, no, it is that if God does not exist, then we find no meaning. It is not as what people like to interpret it as if we do not believe in God, then there is no meaning. Because I think there's a categorical difference between the two. The one of if God does not exist ontologically, and if people do not believe in God, there's a difference between the two ideas.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And you know what I think meaning is fundamentally?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a certain seeing inside you more than who you are, and in love, for example. But I think also in your reading of Dostoevsky, because when I read Dostoevsky, I felt nothing of what you felt. You know, I think he's a wonderful author, and the story, the novels are gripping, but I do not have the kind of epiphany that I think you feel when you read Dostoevsky. Instead, it doesn't feel bland to me, but it feels all right. It's a great author, but instead there are some other authors where when I read, I'm just filled with meaning, and I don't know. I mean, do you think the ultimate structure of meaning is this seeing inside you what is beyond you, and then seeing how you and what is beyond you equate each other?
I think there's definitely that idea of the subjective personal understanding of meaning. But I think that idea of meaning is very different from a more universal, ultimate kind of nature meaning. Perhaps more of what Harry is saying in his last comment, you can get personal meaning, but not ultimate meaning. That's perhaps one of the things that you might be referring to. But I think that what Dostoevsky would respond is that your belief in the meaning is betraying your fundamental presupposition in the divine. I'm not necessarily saying whether that's correct or not, because I haven't completely thought through it yet myself either, and it is quite late at night. Though I do definitely think that when you're saying that there is ultimately meaning, that meaning becomes more in depth, because it is not just this fleeting kind of emotion, but in its idea of being contingent, it has also its necessary concept in the fact that it has necessary implications on both the present, the future, and in some senses the past as well. And it is that kind of that implication, that meaning, which is not just a moment in the present, but also the moment in the future as well, which is that kind of presupposition of the higher nature of some, or to some degree. And I haven't thought through it completely, but I think that that's perhaps one of the areas where you want to dive into next.
I mean, you're correct, but I want to move on to another topic. It's on the in the comment section. Why do you want to study philosophy and theology, Josh?
Well, I think that philosophy and theology is, for part of it, is because there's honestly nothing better you can do in, it's exactly that problem that we raised in the beginning when we were discussing all the way back to, what was it, of it being completely useless to universities are only needed if you need a natural science or healthcare or be an academic. I honestly can't view myself doing anything related to the STEM or healthcare, because I think STEM is mostly nowadays just complete deceit. Or it's like or is it's
I don't think STEM is deceit, Josh.
No, I'm not saying that STEM is deceit in its nature, but it is too oftenly used or taken as a way to deceit, such that it's very difficult to tell the difference between the two. And the best way to look at it is not from an academic subject, but rather as a third-person observer. And that's basically my problem, and that's why I say it's kind of like deceit, because you never know who on earth is trying to, what exactly is the situation, and that's why the third person is the most important thing. And as a result, since I'm not doing natural science or healthcare, and I want to be an academic, because I honestly can't see any other job I'm in. I mean, I could possibly be a lawyer, but I don't know. I'm not really into that kind of stuff too much, because it becomes so kind of, I really don't know. I think that being a lawyer just doesn't work very well to me.
You can be an academic on Pornhub, Josh.
that might become a new a theory that we can follow. But I think that getting a degree would be important. And there's perhaps no better way to do it than just doing philosophy and theology in college, perhaps. And yes,
but
I mean,
Harry. I'm still wondering, why do you want to be an academic after talking so much shit about the education system, and you still want to be an academic?
Because I think there's a difference between being an academic about academics, like a certain friend of ours, or being an academic about something else. Because if you're teaching philosophy, at least you have the ability to influence people in your circle, and not influence in a malicious, manipulating way, but rather to guide them. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with your so-called cultish following of mine, and or with the people around me. It's not necessarily what they want to believe in, but at least help them understand that there's so much more to life than just mere ideology or extremism. Now, of course, so you can debate for God is definitely something that I come across my mind, though I have to admit that I've become very disillusioned with the idea of debate recently, because honestly, if you look at my video Sex and Sensibility, it's honestly become a bit of a madness how quick people are to view your views. Like, I was having this discussion, some guy just tried to insult me in the comments, and I was like, well, what exactly are your problems? It says in exactly a massive list of my problems. And I'm like, mate, I literally agree with 90% of the things you say. What on earth do you mean? What on earth do you mean when you say that I disagree with you? It's like the moment that they see any form of debate, the moment the immediate conclusion is that person must disagree with everything the other person is saying, which is definitely not true. So as a result, I'm very disillusioned with the nature of debate. I'm like, to hell with the debate concept. We just.
Josh, I don't think being an academic would be much better if you were to do original work. There's a person I really love that I'm reading right now called Paul Feyerabend, and I talked to you about his book Against Method, which is basically against all like the mainstream views about rationalism. And then he got so much comments and reviews of his book that was just off the mark. Which is similar to your comments, that he commented. He's like, academics are so incompetent that it seems like the academics aren't incompetent as such. And in the same way, I don't know, it seems like people hallucinate, and we probably also do when we encounter views that we disagree with, or we just hallucinate, and we conjure up things that people do not believe, and we think that they believe in them. And we wholeheartedly do so, and we think that we have evidence to support it.
I think that's true, but I think the elements of that's true, but I don't think that should be seen as a stop or a problem to being an academic, because I think that academics should be seen as a platform, not as something as an end in itself. I view being in academics, a professor, as a way to be able to help other people instead of something where I want to be an academic because academic is good. And that is exactly why debating for God is not necessarily the achievement, but it's helping people think and helping people find their way in a world which is struggling and is suffering, perhaps.
But Josh, okay, you can finish your sentence.
And perhaps you can also. I was just going to revert the question to you, like, why do you want to study philosophy, and what exactly are the aims or the ends to that idea?
Well, I think a last comment is that if you want to be influential, I feel like there are better ways to do so than
I just
being
poured
an
water
academic.
all over my table. Alas.
I mean, there's a symbolism for how I don't know what is symbolism for. God, if you want to be an academic, there's better ways to influence people than. Do you want to do 7 years of PhD, Josh?
I honestly, what else would you do?
To work. Oh, do you want to do 7 years of PhD on Anscombe's ontological argument?
Of course
Spend
not.
7 years
That's
of your life listening to it. No, but that's the kind of thing you have to do when you're doing a PhD
I know, but that is
dissertation.
part. Yeah, I know, but that's part of the situation. But that's not the be all and end all. Life is part of going through some things that you don't want to do to reach an end that you want to achieve. And I think that is exactly what Harry Stark just said in the comments, saying you need the credentials if you want to get taken seriously. I mean, yes, that is part of being taken seriously, but also there's that idea that you have to go through certain aspects in order to reach a certain end, and that is perhaps one of the parts of nature that you just have to take as aiming to be an academic. But I honestly don't know, because I don't necessarily think that there is a very easy or another way that you want to focus on. Because I mean, you could turn the question to you, and I think you'll immediately reach the same problems. Why do you want to do philosophy? You can take that. You can say that to the stream because I need to take a piss, but I don't have AirPods, so I wouldn't know what you're saying at all. But just go on and say it. And
my AirPods is running out of battery, so I'm doing emergency salvaging.
Okay, you can go talk for now, and you go to the bathroom.
Okay. Well, I think my goal is much less noble than Josh. I mainly picked philosophy for the UK for applying for Cambridge because it's the subject that I have the most comparative advantage in. I actually had great interest in literature. I wanted to study English as well as philosophy, and I really wanted to do maths also. At the start, I actually wanted to apply to mathematics and philosophy in Oxford, but realizing that I was good at maths, but probably not not Oxford caliber, and seeing the acceptance rates of mathematics and philosophy at like 6 or 7%, I decided to go for Cambridge philosophy, which is like 20%. And in some ways, I'm not sure whether I want to study philosophy at Cambridge. In that I've spent already so much time doing philosophy, and I'm not entirely sure whether the analytic style of Cambridge is suitable for me. But at the same time, it's the best place to go, and that's why if I'm to be in the UK, I have to go to Cambridge. I don't really want to go to any other course because I don't really want to study philosophy. But if I'm in Cambridge in Trinity, then I think it's all right because there's intelligent people talking to me. And what I'm imagining is that, well, I get into philosophy and I go and audit all kinds of courses inside classics, inside theology, and I even take some maths courses. I'm actually extremely interested in trying to learn more maths and sciences on top of philosophical studies, because I think most humanities people have this contempt towards STEM. I think, like Josh said, and most STEM people have a certain contempt for people studying humanities. It's like if you're a comparative literature student, I don't think any math student would take you seriously. Like this person is just doing bullshit, which probably they are, but what I want normally is just to learn everything, and philosophy is just my best way to get into Cambridge. But if I go into go to the US, like I don't know, if I get into fucking Princeton, then I'm definitely hopefully none of the admissions officer listens to this.
My friend, you are muted.
Okay.
You sound like God now. You might. I'm gonna turn you down. Okay.
I sound like God. Wait.
You should believe in God now, my friend, because you literally sound like one.
How loud am I?
I've turned you down, so I think you're way better.
I'll put on another mic, but just wait 1 sec.
So I think it's very interesting because, like the question section are like, do you prefer continental philosophy? Do you want to study philosophy of art, philosophy of science, or philosophy of religion? That's quite interesting because, I mean, you never told me exactly what on earth you're applying to, especially some universities tell you what you're applying to. Like, what exactly did you put in U Chicago as your fields of study or fields of interest?
Okay. U Chicago is actually a university that I want to go to. So in it, there's this really interesting major. There's actually 2 very interesting majors. And if I'm going to U Chicago, I think I'm going to triple major like a fucking idiot because the tuition is so expensive. But there's a major called Big Ideas, another one called Fundamentals. I think Fundamentals, texts, and I don't know, and readings or something. And those 2 majors basically just let you do anything you want and just read the great books, think a lot, and to be honest, I don't want to call myself a philosopher at all. I don't think I'm one, and definitely not a professional one. I just want to read a lot, learn a lot, think a lot. I'm especially interested in learning science and maths, because most philosophers don't learn science and maths, and I think it's a great waste, especially the continental kind. And you know, I think I would prefer continental philosophy, but I think that the distinction is rather fake, because there's continental and analytic is the 20th century distinction, and I think most continental philosophy is bullshit, and most analytic philosophy is boring as hell. Like it's in the nature of the field that there's that 99% of the works produced is just plain bad, and I think it's a tragedy that both sides sort of despise each other so much. Instead, for me, instead of looking at it in the analytic continental divide, which I admit there is a certain difference in style and content, and I just want to read who I love to read. The continental analytic, I don't care. Just, as long as you're interesting and intriguing. In fact, recently I've been reading a lot of analytic philosophy because I'm applying to Cambridge, like 9 hours of analytic philosophy every single day, and it's actually really, really intriguing. It's brilliant, but you just have to pick the right people. There are certain analytic philosophers that I wouldn't touch at all because they're just so boring. But there are certain ones that are wonderful.
So what jobs do you actually want to work towards? Because I mean, what I hear now is that you actually just want to do absolutely nothing, and that just seems like your future plan. Absolutely nothing.
I think you're right. My future plan is absolutely nothing, and living on my parents' money. Or in fact, you know what's my plan? That's why I'm trying to apply to so many like top 10 universities, because my parents promised me that if I get into a US top 10, then they would give me every year twice the tuition. I mean,
honestly, if you get twice the tuition, that's enough. You're settled for life. That's how expensive the tuition is.
That's what I'm thinking. I just get twice the tuition. I put it into like the stock market, but not like volatile stocks, just the general trend stocks.
Yeah.
And I wait for it to go up, and every year I just take a bit out to sustain my life, because I'm not a very luxurious person. Like I think this shirt, I've worn it for like 3 years. I just wore white shirts every single day, the exact same kind. And it's like $100 in Walmart, and then you get like 10 of them. So that's the kind of life I lead, and I don't need to spend that much money. So I can just live off my parents, and also I guess the other future aspiration is just to find a girl I love and marry and have kids. And
I think that's a very problem though. If you don't have a direction in life, I don't think the type of girl that you want to marry would actually like you back.
no,
I'm being horribly blunt with you, my friend.
I have a direction in life. Do you not see?
No, your direction in life is to have no direction in life.
Well, my direction in life is you learn as much as possible.
No, but then that's not a sustainable direction in life for anyone who's
it is a sustainable direction in life. Why is it not? Why is it unsustainable?
I mean, it's like, where on earth are you getting the money from? I mean, it's
money from my parents after.
No, but that is exactly the problem. No, that is exactly the problem, though. You don't have a job. The lack of the job is the lack of the direction. That's the society standards.
I think in terms of a job, if I land on one, which is like doing writing, and I would just do it anyways, then I'm fine with that. But I wouldn't want to go into a job that would waste my time, so to speak, on like other affairs other than having no would waste my time on my pursuit of having no direction in life. But you know what? I just want to marry someone who is intellectually who intellectually is I don't know what I'm saying now.
Who's intellectually as strong as you, so you can be challenged.
I don't want to sound so cocky though. So
no, but it's true though. Like, imagine a female Josh Yenny and like Warren's like smash immediately.
Yeah.
Not my madness.
My aspiration is just to talk philosophy, talk literature, talk anything, talk maths all day long with someone, and then read math, philosophy, literature all day long, and live off my parents' money after I get into hopefully Cambridge, fingers crossed, or one of the Ivy Leagues.
No, you don't get into Cambridge. Cambridge tuition is like nowhere near as much as like Princeton or something like that.
I think if I get into Cambridge, they promise me like the most expensive college inside US times 2. For
really?
the Cambridge, yeah. You know why? Because there was a period where I was like, I don't want to go to universities anymore. Like it's just completely corrupt, and I can learn more by myself. And they got so panicking. They decided to attract me with money, and they managed to do it. They managed to attract me with money. I'm like, I have to get in to get the money, and that's why I'm working my ass off right now.
I think that this is a new title. I could just upload this as a short clip. Warren Zhu's reason for money, and I get like 5 million views, and then on your and it's like Thinker's Kitchen suddenly gets like top 1 in the world on podcast, and it's like Warren Zhu has finally beat me on the podcast rankings.
Yeah, no, it's like, I don't know, probably $1 million US every year. No, not $1 million US. No, that's not that much. No, it's $1 million HKD every year, probably a bit more. No, like 2 million HKD every year.
Okay, Princeton tuition is is $74,000 US,
okay.
which translates wait, let me get my calculator out.
600,000 HK. But no, mind you, it's the most expensive out of the top 10s. So
really?
Yeah.
That's impressive. That's very impressive, my friend. But I suppose this is perhaps a good place to actually let's end off this discussion by responding to this question. I said that we will talk about this at the end, but why on earth do I not want to go to a university in Hong Kong? And I think that the reason is that if you thought that universities in Hong Kong are corrupt and ideological, I think Hong Kong universities take it to a complete next level. Not necessarily in a woke sense. Hong Kong universities aren't necessarily woke by any stretch of the imagination. But I do necessarily think that there is a somewhat of a level of they're so politically driven, either pro or anti a certain government that shall remain unnamed, that it is very worrying for me, and I genuinely do not want to be in such a environment. And
for me, it's just I think I don't think the Hong Kong universities are top tier. Period. So I don't want to go there.
That's true. But I mean, you could probably tie on perhaps to it and develop some line of thinking such that if you ended up in it's like due to certain laws which has restricted us from saying certain things during this video, there's also a reason why I don't want to be I don't want to be in academia in Hong Kong either. I might actually follow the fate of Socrates, not in a metaphorical way, but a literal way of corrupting the youth. I might die. So as a result, I am a bit worried.
No, but to be honest, after thinking about it, I'm feeling very happy that if I get into like a good university.
Exactly. Of course, because Warren Zhu just wants some money. That's
No,
like the tagline.
outside of money, I have changed my mind, Josh. I have been converted because you know at the start we talked about how most men just think about women when they think about other things, and I'm thinking about meeting people who are intelligent inside big universities.
I'll be very happy as well, you know. We should make a similar stream like this, like every year, so that we could get like a catch up with what's going on in Warren Zhu's life, and we can figure out whether he's finding the woman that he's been looking for, the intellectual woman. And every year we check in on Zhu Fuchang.
No, and then it's like I don't know, 2,300, and then Warren Zhu. It's like gray. I become like Confucius with all the gray beard. Like I still haven't found anyone.
Yeah, indeed.
I'm still living off my stocks that I got like 200 years ago.
Yes, and it ends up like Zhu Fuchang is like, what was it? And then Zhu Fuchang becomes Yon Ming Park and says, you know, I went to those intellectual universities, but it turns out that the women there were just as bad as anywhere else. And on that note, I think we should end this live stream. It's been absolutely colossal. Normally we say 1 hour live streams are long, but this live stream went for 2 hours. And I can't believe you guys actually decided to stay through the entire live stream. Harry Starks, what a lad, actually staying through us for the entire live stream. It's absolute madness. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoy this content, make sure to like and subscribe. I have to say that it's in my nature already. It's by necessity that I have to say such a self advertising idea. If you want to check out our content, check out Thinker's Kitchen or Dostoevsky and Us. Stay safe, my friends. See you soon, and goodbye. I'll see you in the next one.